Problem 1-60. Define a variable and then write and solve an equation for the problem below. Remember that you can use the 5D process described in lesson 113 math notes box to help you get started. State your solution in a sentence. The problem states, Todd is 10 years older than Jamal. The sum of their ages is 64. How old are Todd and Jamal? So in these problems, we want to define a variable, write and solve an equation. Then you have to use a solution in a sentence. So use a full sentence. So in our problem, we have two people and they're being compared. Older means there's comparison, and specifically Todd is 10 years older. We also have the word sum, which means total, which means combine ages, so like adding the two ages together. And the question is being asked, how old are both? Like separately, of course, Todd and Jamal. Now they also referred to the 5D process, which I'm going to also review in this video as well. And hopefully we could follow that process to solve the problem. So I went back to lesson 113 and I read about the 5D process. So 1 stands for describe, so the first D. The second D for draw. Third is for define. Fourth is for do, so do the work or solve an equation, and D is decide. So I'm gonna follow this process while I'm creating the situation. So the describing in a way is like so the first step, two steps could be combined together. You could describe and draw. The description is going back to the text and figuring out what's going on. So one person is older than the other, and then we have the sum. So I'm gonna describe and draw at the same time. I kind of describe what I'm given. So I know that Todd is older, so I'm gonna draw a picture or like a diagram for both of them, but one of them will be longer. So older means more. So what that diagram shows me, there is a gap right here. So I know this will be the older, so that will be exactly 10 older. So that's my diagram. I also know that the sum is their ages, so I need to add all these together. So in a picture, what you do, you would add them as length. So Todd's, which had the 10, and Jamal's, which is this size. I'm trying to have the same size. So the total will be 64. And our next step is definitely to define. So we need to define like a variable. The variable is something that is missing, but I can see that is repeating. Like when we compare, this is the missing and is the same for both. So I can say let X be the age of, in this case X will be Jamal's age. So let X be the age for Jamal. So this is me defining the letter X. So that means Todd is an expression of X, which is X plus 10. So that's the expression. Now if I look at the total, I have X here and X here, and then the first one, X plus 10, is Todd's picture, and then Jamal is just the X. So so that's what the defining means for the X. Now do, think of do is the next step. Is like, what would you use this information? Can you write an equation? So based on the information of sum, or even if my picture, I have X plus 10 for Todd plus another X for Jamal, total is equal to 64. And on purpose I use parentheses here to show that this is the expression for Todd. So do your work basically. So could you solve this equation to find x? Now it's also good to know that you could also guess and check, like according to the picture, like what number would work, and then we can decide. So there's multiple ways, but I wanted to follow the steps of the 5D process. So right now I have x plus 10 plus x. So I have two groups of x on the left side. So I'm going to combine, and this is combine like terms, and 10 is not a like term with the x, so it stays the same, and then equals 64. Now go ahead and pause the video, see if you could solve the equation for x. Can you solve it on your own? If not, stay with the video and I'm going to show my steps. So because they're unlike, I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides, and I'm going to have 2x plus 0, so I'm going to write the plus 0, equals, and then 64 minus 10, the expression is 54, and that's on the right side. And then I can divide by 2 because it's 2 times x, so divide by 2 both sides. So you have one group of x equals, and then I'm going to have you decide what that is. So go ahead and finish the problem on your own. So based on that division, 54 divided by 2, that's going to give me x. You have to decide, so I'm going back to deciding. So when you have x equals your number that you're going to find, decide if it makes sense. For example, you want to check your work either in the picture or in the equation to see if it makes sense. And lastly, when you're deciding, you are answering the question. So remember the question up top was, I'm going to highlight it in red, how old are Todd and Jamal? So how old is Todd separately and how old is Jamal separately? So make sure you write that down on your own as well before you continue to the next problem.